Well, according to a Times of Israel report, Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas said late Tuesday that the Ramallah-based Palestinian leadership is prepared to enter a peace process based on international law and United Nations Security Council and General Assembly resolutions, the official PA news site Wafa reported. Abbas made the comments hours after Pope Francis said in a Christmas message he hoped Israelis and Palestinians would resume dialogue and undertake a journey of peace that can put an end to a conflict that for over 70 years has rent the land chosen by the Lord to show his face of love. Asked about the Pope's comments, an Israeli official who requested anonymity said in a phone call Israel has repeatedly expressed its readiness to enter a diplomatic process with the Palestinians without preconditions. Now, of course, we have to take all this with what Mr. Abbas has said. He indicated that he would come to the peace table with Israel under international rule. And probably the sound bite that I would take away from this is that he will resume dialogue under international law and United Nations Security Council and General Assembly resolutions. So I'm not sure how to actually take that at this point in time, whether or not he's actually going to come back to the table or hear what the Trump administration has got to present. But as I've said many times, that I believe that once this peace process is introduced, and it'll probably be introduced after the April 9th elections, Israeli elections, and again, based upon who actually wins, will likely determine what the direction will be from there. I would have a hard time believing that Mr. Trump would just dismiss and permanently file his Middle East peace plan if, in fact, Mr. Netanyahu lost, but who knows what will happen. And as I've said, Mr. Abbas, he may not make he might make it through 2019. He is in poor health, and it's possible that he could probably die in 2019, but again, he may not. But there's certainly a lot of options that are available and that could take place during this time. Change of leadership in Israel. Mr. Abbas continuing to be stubborn about hearing the plan. And there was one more twist that Stratford did mention. They didn't believe that 2019 would be a good year for the peace process. And they felt from their sources that they probably were not going to see the Trump plan adopted in 2019. That doesn't mean he's not going to introduce it. But of course, that was left up to speculation. What their speculation was is that instead of that being adopted, they would try to take one more thing off the table, which would be the recognition of the Golan Heights being the property of Israel's. And that, like the recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's undivided capital and moving your embassy to Jerusalem, would be a major blow in the international community. Much of the international community believes that if land is acquired through war, that ultimately it had to be given back to the rightful owners. So with that said, and again, that's international law, Israel would have to give back the Golan Heights to Syria since it was acquired through war. So if indeed the United States does recognize the Golan Heights as now territory that will be added to Israel, that would be a big blow and also would take one more item off the table for this peace process. Now moving to Israel's northern front, as you know, the United States will be moving their 2,000 troops out of Syria. President Trump has made this decision, and he said that, listen, we give Israel $3.5 billion to Israel every year for defense. They can take care of themselves. And for the most part, that's probably true. Of course, the Trump administration was not in Syria 5 years ago. And Iran has been building up proxy groups and also land bridges for multiple years, and most likely before the United States got there. Now, of course, the U.S. probably slowed some of that down, and now that they're gone, or they will be gone, that process will probably be accelerated. But at the same time, now Israel will have to do more invasions of Syria. And, you know, one of the outcries of this most recent attack has been that Israel destroyed Syrian facilities and not Iranian facilities. Well, of course, the problem with that is that Syria is allowing Iran to put weapons and systems slated for Hezbollah and their other proxy groups. I believe they said that there are 5. but they're allowing them to put this equipment and technology in Syrian facilities that have been guarded by Russian anti-aircraft equipment. But getting to my point, and that is that Russia is now very angry at Israel for making this raid. And here's an article coming out of Debka that I think opens up a lot of wounds that Russia may have regarding Israel attacking Syria, basically under their watch. It says a new Russian threat was received in Israel on Wednesday, December 26. Any more airstrikes and Syria's SA-5 air defense missiles will be fired deep into Israel, like the one that shook several towns on Tuesday night in the middle of the Israeli Air Force attack on Iranian sites in Syria. Israel's air defense system missed the intruding missile. It exploded harmlessly in an unpopulated part of Mount Carmel. By issuing this threat, Moscow confirmed that the Syrian missile was aimed deliberately at the Israeli heartland and was not astray from the attacks on Israeli aircraft, as some Israeli officials have claimed. People in nearby towns where the missile exploded reported that their houses shook under the blast, and for many hours the air reeked of gunpowder. 250,000 Israeli civilians were affected. That would be a mild foretaste of what is to come if the Russians carry out their threat of payback for any more Israeli attacks over Syria. And that was a single SA-5 missile. The impact of 5 or 10 fired by a Syrian battery does not bear thinking of. The SA-5, Russian-coded S-200, is elderly, but it has a very long range, medium to high altitude surface-to-air capacity, can function in all weathers, and can be used to hit ground targets as well as aircraft and missiles. Debka military sources note that the Russians indicated that Syria would not launch a surface missile offensive against Israel, but would employ a tit-for-tat strategy countering Israeli airstrikes over Syrian airspace with missile attacks over Israeli airspace. There was no indication of whether Israeli air attacks mounted from Lebanese skies were included in the threat. Now, the reason why I said that is because right now Moscow is not protecting any incoming missile attacks or aircraft coming in through Lebanon airspace. But right now they're considering heavily that they need to put batteries over there. And that would seal off a key attack area from Israel. Now, this is what military sources had to say. So the Russian military sources describe the Israeli attack as being conducted by Israeli Air Force warplanes, which launched 16 missiles carrying GBU-39 bunker busters. 2 reached their targets and 14 were intercepted by Syrian air defense weapons. Of course, that number is probably manipulated. Probably, I'm sure, more of the bunker busters did get their target. Of course, one of the other things that Russia may end up doing is they may bring in more S-300s and S-400s. Now, certainly, Israel probably does have the ability to defeat both these systems, but we'll see how they react once, if in fact the Russians do bring in an S-400, which basically is their latest and greatest. Now, it's being rumored that an S-500 system, which is the most powerful anti-aircraft missile defense system available, but I have to believe that the U.S. has got that one beat. But in some corners, they do believe that that is the most powerful. That they're saying it should be operational sometime either next year or in 2020. Now, one thing that is alarming that the article did say, it says that this was the second time, talking about that Syrian missile that was fired into Israel and landed in an open field. So this was the second time in 6 months that an IDF air defense battery failed to shoot down a Syrian missile. On July 23rd, a David's Sling Air anti-air battery missed 2 Syrian SS-21 surface missiles that were heading for the Sea of Galilee. So far they've had 2 missiles that have come into Israel, and Israel's defense system has been unable to down either one of them. But the message I'm trying to convey here is this right here, is that Russia is now become an enemy of Israel's. Now, of course, they still have talks as long as this doesn't break up into a tit-for-tat type of confrontation. Now, if that happened, I can't even imagine if they did send in what they said between 5 and 10 of those rockets, and they were to hit Israeli population centers. I can't even imagine what the situation would turn into from there. It sounds like to me what Russia is saying is that if Israel continues to hit Syrian or Iranian military installations, that they would retaliate and do the same. So this could become a very dangerous situation in a very short amount of time. But we'll have to wait and see how that turns out. Now, one thing I forgot to mention just right here is there's a rumor going around that the Kurds, who are justifiably angry over the Trump administration, abruptly deciding to leave them and also the Syrian southeastern theater, that it's being claimed that they're threatening to release about 3,000 jailed ISIS prisoners in retaliation, or should I say as a threat, over the U.S. departure. Now, whether that's rumor or truth is unknown at this time, but that certainly does not seem to be unrealistic for them to do. So if you've heard anything about this, you have a source, to let me know. And I hope as you've listened to this video that you have made peace with God through Jesus. You know, that's the only way to heaven. And it's made abundantly clear in John 14:6 that Jesus is the only way. So I hope you have accepted the Lord as Savior and that you're living for Him. If not, I would recommend that you do so today. And you Christians, I'd also recommend that you get a copy of my Tribulation Period Survival Guide. You know, I was reading some of the comments from somebody who had purchased or had downloaded one of my books, and they said that this book was completely unnecessary because no one can survive the tribulation period. Well, I have to completely disagree with them because it says both in Revelation and in Zechariah that there will be survivors. And I have to believe that in some cases that some will survive based upon this book. That's how much confidence I have in you getting this to your lost loved one. And you know, at the very least, I would create a rapture type of box or whatever the case may be, a folder or whatever you think you want to leave behind, but something that will give them information that they should either go to my website to either purchase or download this free book. But at the very least, leave a letter indicating that it's available. And I hope that you will do that. Also, if you did want to get a copy today, you can go down to the description section of this video. Click on the link and it'll take you to those resources. Well, this is Terry Malone with the Calvary Prophecy Report.